We're going to talk about the process a little bit. That's the dull part. We'll talk about making contact with your representatives. That's kind of a fun part, not as fun as doing it. And committee hearings, we actually won't hit on that too much today. They will be coming up early next year, but whichever of the 20 of us choose to go forward and do some lobbying, we will have some more instruction on that later. I mean, I don't mean instruction this way, but we will coach ourselves how to prepare for the hearings. So we're not going to focus on the third one today as much. You can hit that again. Okay, a pretty picture here. In the last decade, the Senate has introduced a little over 900 bills each year. The House, about 1,400 a year. Of course, there are many more delegates than there are senators, and there are many reasons for that. So in this part, this is where things get introduced. And in Maryland, there are 3 readings of any bill. One, the day it's introduced. The next, the day the committee decides whatever they decide. The third is when the whole chamber, meaning the House or the Senate, vote on it. So those 3 things. Brenda mentioned that in 2010 there were 84 bills related to sex offender issues. That's a lot. That was like 10% of the bills that year. That's a lot. Last year wasn't as bad. Hey, looking for a good 2012. Most bills, by the way, don't become law. Most bills are modified or combined. Many bills are introduced for PR reasons. Even if a bill doesn't have a chance of passing, if it plays well back home, I'm going to get on the floor and I'm going to introduce it. But every bill has to be treated as though it might pass. You can't let any of them go by and say, that's a harebrained idea, because that'll be the one that passes. We won't talk about the U.S. Congress. We're just talking Maryland here. Okay. Once it's out of committee and the committee does whatever it is and they'll massage it, it goes, the committee will hold hearings on it. That's what we'll talk about next spring. We intend to be at every hearing on every bill of interest to us. Also intend to have written comments on every bill that is of interest to us. Don't leave anything out there. Don't take anything for granted. Once, let's say it was introduced in the House side, as many are, when the House votes on it, that's after 3 readings, then it goes to the Senate, and guess what? They do 3 readings again. If the House passed it, it is then introduced in the Senate, and they go through their process. If it passed out of the Senate, it goes back to the House. So really, bills that aren't introduced early on in a 90-day session are never going to make it. So what that means for us is there will be a flurry of activity in the first few weeks of the session. That's when most of the bills will get introduced. That's why you really need to be ready to go middle of January, not wait till February or March, because the train is out of the station or the cow is out of the barn or whatever your analogy is. Okay, once the House and Senate agree on it, it's pretty much done then, unless there's a veto. We probably aren't going to get a veto of stuff we want. So that, and that's where it goes. So our interactions are when a bill is introduced, in hearings and working with the committees. Once it's on the floor, it's a bit of a wild card. But that's the time you want to hit all your delegates, not just committee members. Next slide, please. A key here we'll get into is finding sponsors. Only members of the General Assembly can sponsor legislation. The governor might wish to, and they'll have to find sponsors. Interest groups, citizens, people like us, but you have to have a member to actually draft the bill. We'll get into that a little later. Next slide, please. There are a number of committees set up. There are 2 really of interest to us. Right now, just for the record, the 2 committees we work with are related to judicial issues. Most of the members are practicing attorneys. when they're out of session, like right now, they're in a full-time job, and that's what they do. When the session starts, they are much more open to meetings and briefings and phone calls because that's what their job is. I can't say everyone is an attorney, but they almost all are attorneys on these committees. The job of a committee is to take all these bills, which are all these legislative ideas, and sort through them. Let's say there are 6 bills on highway infrastructure that different people, repaint the Bay Bridge. No, they're doing that. Fix potholes. Oh, they're not doing that. But the committee, a transportation committee, would integrate those often into one bill that makes sense. So that's what goes on in committee. Once they're done, it passes out of committee on a positive vote, and this is on the floor of the House, and any member can have their say. The public has input at these several places we've talked about, and we'll talk about here in a few minutes. Next slide, please. Sex offender legislation will almost certainly come in the form of amendments, which will, as you said, change the language of what's existing. It will delete words, add words, delete sections, add sections. So to get a full picture, you really have to do some homework to understand how adding these 5 words can totally change the meaning of the existing law. And that will almost certainly be the nature of all of the amendments that come in. It will be that kind of, the amendment might be 20 words or 5 words or 50, but how it fits in the existing law, it's what we have to sort out, what you all have to sort out, it's the big we have to sort out. Okay, how about next slide?
I went to the next one.
You are so much ahead of me. On a committee.
There's the names of the committee.
Yeah. And getting around Annapolis, Brenda tells me, isn't difficult. Whoever comes, we'll find these folks' offices and find the office of your own delegate and senator. And actually, they're happy to see you. Okay. Let's, this is real important, this last one. The question came up before. Out of the 936 bills, and there were more that year, actually. So the group site is probably for us the most ready reference to what's out there, what's hot. And probably anybody involved in legislation probably wants to check that daily come January. That will be changing. And that's another thing to talk about. I'm really, really excited. There are 20 people in the room. I think that's a perfect number. Maybe some people wanted to see 100. That would be nice too. But to actually go and occupy Annapolis, I know occupy means something else, not camp out there, this is a good number of people. 20 is a good number of people. So it's really, really good to see that. For those of us that live in a district, and there are representatives, we have probably the best access to them. We would still have to craft any request to meet with their needs, what they need politically, other issues going on. So I think they really will become the focus. And if something passes strongly out of committee, it's not a given that it will pass on the floor, but it often does. The committee is really where things happen. I think I'm near the end of my piece. Any questions on this so far? If you hit another slide, I think we'll change topics. Stewart is going to come back up here and go through some more specifics, as you can see.
Thanks, David. Appreciate it. Yeah, we do try to have fun, even though some people try to keep us from having fun. But it's, before I get in to what I'm going to talk about, which is these 5 things very quickly, David had touched on something, one of the last things that he said about some of the things that how fair is perceived or received or promoted by other people. And having a legislator tell a constituent, or anyone for that matter, to contact us is just tremendous. You have to think about what that really means in those circles. And we have done a lot of things to build credibility. We attend, the governor has a Sexual Offenders Advisory Board that is comprised of very high officials. Bloomberg from parole, most people know him. People from public safety, from the state police, from the public defender's office, the state's attorney's office, Department of Mental Health. All of these people are handpicked by the governor's office to sit on this board. And we have attended every meeting that they've had since they started re-meeting. They went about a year and didn't meet, and then they got all in trouble. So they started meeting again, and we've attended every meeting, and we're actually received. We're the only visitors. It's open to the public, but it's not the kind of meeting where you're sitting around and say, well, what are we going to do today? Oh, I think we'll go to the Sexual Offenders Advisory Board meeting. I got nothing else to do. So there aren't a whole lot of visitors there, but we are there. We're there at every meeting, and we're recognized at those meetings. We've actually been able to make comments and be recognized in some of the discussions, which is not really heard of. So we've developed credibility with a lot of state officials, the subject matter experts for the state in this area for sexual offenses. And we are actually promoted to give presentations to parole and probation offices around the state. And Bruce Gerber, who is one of the, he's a special assistant to the director for parole and probation. So very high level state official. You know, he's still a government person, but very high level, is well known throughout parole and probation. He sent an email, personally sent an email to every regional director in the state for parole and probation, inviting us, FAIR, to talk to all of the parole offices that decided to have their own Halloween party this year. Silver Spring took us up on it. And we went and we talked about 40, what was it, about 40 people, Brenda, there? At least 40 people at Silver Spring. They welcomed us. Of course, we told them, hey, we're here for Bruce Gerber. Oh, Bruce Gerber, yeah, come in. I mean, you mentioned his name. There's no one in parole and probation that doesn't know who he is. So that credibility is developed over time, but it's very significant. You have to realize that we're making inroads in this process. And that's why we're here today, because people know who we are now. And when we go in as a lobbying organization, we have some type of clout. Find out that there's some nasty things coming out, and you're going to want to try to prevent them from happening. So we're going to be able to tell you when things are in committee, and when you need to kind of start doing something. Initially, even beforehand, before even the legislative session gets in effect, although it is a little more difficult, as David said, because a lot of times they're working, they're not readily available in Annapolis. But if they're in your district, they live near you or they work near you. So you still have that opportunity to see them. So you may want to see them, try to see them even before any bills come out, just to introduce yourself and say, hey, one of your constituents, I voted for you, or I didn't vote for you, but I wanted to, or this is why I didn't vote. Just have a candid conversation with them. Let them know who you are. And you want to have, the best way to do that with legislators is to have the one-on-one conversation with anybody. I mean, email, I don't really like email because there are too many times I've sent email out, and email doesn't have inflection, email doesn't have tone. Email is just a bunch of words on a paper, and you have no idea how it's going to be received by the person that you're sending the email to. And 9 times out of 10, it's received the wrong way. And then they get mad. What does they mean by this? And it's like, so I don't really like important things being done over email, but that's kind of the way our society is going. So one-on-one, always the best way to get your message across. When the General Assembly meets, like David said, there's much better access. visit, call, fax, mail, whatever. Do something to let them know you're out here. Do something to let them know how you feel about a certain bill or a certain committee issue. So and David covered most of this really well. If you're a constituent, they're going to see you. They want your vote. Most of the legislators, I believe, are legislators because they like the power, they like the authority, they like the position, they like the respect, they like the responsibility, and the only way they can get that is by having a whole bunch of constituents like them. So they're going to see you because of that, because if a constituent doesn't like them, that, you know, if you go into a store or you go into a restaurant and you don't like the food, how many people do you tell? Or if you have a bad experience with something, how many people do you tell? But if you have a good experience, how many people do you tell? It's usually, you know, 10 to 1. You know, you might say, hey, you know, I had a real good deal over at the mall and fine. But if you had a bad deal at the mall, you're going to tell everybody. So that's just human nature. So the legislators want us to like them. They want us to say good things about them. So they're going to meet with you. They are going to meet with you. And David covered this real well. If particularly, you know, we're targeting the 2 judicial committees. So if one of your legislators happens to be on one of the judicial committees, please make it a point to meet that person. Talk to that person, have that person know who you are before anything else goes on. So when you call again, they'll say, oh yeah, I met you over at, you know, that maybe they have a town hall meeting or something, go to it. And they'll remember where they met you, usually. They usually have good memories, or their aide has a good memory. So somebody will remember you. So you can go to the next one. If you're going to talk to a representative, there's 2 approaches you can use. You can be a citizen, and you can say, I'm here because of this. I don't like this, I do like this, I want you to do this, but I want you to do this for me, because this is my personal view. If you're going representing fair, we will implore that you get notes from us, that you have the message straight, that FAIR is presenting. Because when the legislators talk to each other, and if different messages start coming in representing an organization, the organization loses credibility. They'll say there's a bunch of people out here and they're all representing FAIR, and one likes this and one doesn't like this, and we don't even know what to do. So even if they wanted to support us, they wouldn't know how, because they don't know what side to support. So just be cognizant of that. Just be aware that if you're going to say something where we promote that you go and you talk to them on a specific issue, just make sure that you use the notes that we'll provide to help your talking points or whatever, so that it's consistent. It's a little point, but it's very, very, very important. And, you know, a lot of this is just common sense. You know, obviously, when you meet with somebody, you're going to tell them who you are, and you're going to tell them where you're from. So they know who you are, and they know that you're one of their constituents. And if you call them, you're going to tell them, you know, what the purpose of the call, whether you oppose or support a bill. Very short conversations usually during the legislative session, because they're getting a lot of calls, they're dealing with a lot of things, they're really very busy. They have all these bills coming across their desks, and they don't read half of them, and they have somebody else reading them for them, and it's just a real crazy session. So you just want to get in and get out usually. Okay. And of course, you don't really, I wouldn't say they're not interested in your hardships, but when they're in the legislative session, all they're interested in is, are they going to vote for a bill or not vote for a bill, and how many constituents can they keep happy? You know, which one's going to be the best way for them to go? So they don't want to hear, a 30-minute story necessarily about the things that you're going through personally. But there is a time for that, depending on the type of legislation, or if, like, for example, if FAIR went in representing a bill or lobbying for a bill, we may take a couple of stories with us about the particular hardships that are created by this type of legislation. So we might present that as a reason for them not to vote for it or to change it or modify it a little bit. But it's given in a different context. So just be real careful about taking a whole lot of time talking about personal kind of situations. Go ahead. And again, keep real brief. Don't rant about how bad the government and political officials are, even though in many times both of them are terrible. Although it is that process, it allows us to go talk to them. So, we have to make the best of it. And you typically don't get shot by going to a legislator's office as you do in a lot of other countries. So we still need to put things in perspective as to some of the freedoms that we have here in the United States, and be aware that even though some of the legislators at least don't give a lot of regard to the Constitution, either the United States or the Maryland, that's something that I think Barry and I will talk about it towards the end, about some of the things that we can do in that respect. Because that's an unconscionable position for a legislator representing constituents not to be concerned with constitutional rights. And yeah, it always helps to take notes with you and use the right slide, or you throw your notes away. And polite, professional, common sense stuff. Hi, Mr. Legislator, Mrs. Legislator, it's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you for your time. I didn't really like what you said. You don't say that, but thank you for your time, because their time is valuable. So you thank them. And
Stu got into it. So you have this meeting, and the person the elected official was a real, you can fill in the blank, but you feel like he didn't listen. You're in total disagreement. Still be polite and professional, because I think what I've heard is an elected official, they might not help you, but they can hurt you. They can say, I didn't really care about that bill, but now I'm going to vote against it. And so it's one of those things, I guess it goes without saying, no matter how bad your experience is, and hopefully it won't be bad, but if it's bad, still be polite and be professional.
That's a great point, David. You don't want to piss off your elected official, because you're right. They could be neutral on a bill, but just because you tick them off, they're going to vote against that or for that bill, whichever way you didn't want it to go. They're going to vote that way just to spite you. Some of them will. Some of them are spiteful. When you take the message to the legislatures that these laws are destroying families, you can almost take the registrant out of the equation. You don't even have to mention the registrant, and the registrant will benefit, but that's a message that you can take to the media. That's a message that a legislator can support. He can say, well, this bill is going to hurt this family. It's going to hurt these children. It's going to make them move. It's going to help them, lose their job, or the kids are going to of this family are going to be abused or harassed. Those are messages that are clean. They can be supported. And if you take the registrant out of the equation, they're very easily supported. So.